Mountain Man saw the black woman repairing an old cabin. What he did that day will amaze you. The bearded hermit froze mid-step as desperate hammering echoed through the Colorado pines, drawing him toward a collapsing homestead where a determined widow battled time and approaching storm clouds. Townspeople whispered he was nothing but a broken ghost who'd lost everything to grief 15 years past. They expected him to die alone in those mountains, another cautionary tale of a man destroyed by his failures. But this woman's fierce determination to save her late husband's dream awakened something the hermit thought was dead forever. Her fight wasn't just against the elements. Powerful men wanted her gone, and helping her meant exposing secrets that could destroy them both. Would the mountain hermit walk away from another soul in desperate need, or would this moment force two broken people to confront the past that haunted them? Before we continue, comment where you are tuning in from. Perhaps we will publish a story there. The autumn wind cut through Jeremiah Mackenzie's weathered coat as he descended the rocky mountain trail toward Pine Ridge. His beard hung thick and unkempt after months of solitude in his cave dwelling high above the timberline. The trading post beckoned below, its chimney smoke promising warmth he hadn't felt since spring. 15 years of isolation had carved deep lines around his eyes. His buckskin clothing bore patches upon patches, stitched with the patience of a man who had nothing but time. The leather satchel on his shoulder contained the last of his silver coins, carefully hoarded for this annual descent into civilization. Pine Ridge's main street stretched before him like a gauntlet. Conversations died as he approached. Children ducked behind their mothers' skirts. Men turned away, shaking their heads at the sight of him. The general store's bell chimed his entrance. Ezra Whitman looked up from his ledger, his face tightening with recognition. "Supplies," Jeremiah said, his voice rough from disuse. Whitman nodded curtly. "Winter coming early this year." Jeremiah gathered flour, salt, and ammunition while whispers followed him through the aisles. A woman pulled her young son closer as he passed. "Is that the man who couldn't save anyone?" the boy asked loudly. His mother hushed him, but the words hung in the air like smoke. At the counter, Whitman tallied the items. "That'll be $18. Jeremiah counted out his coins slowly. The price was steep, but arguing would only draw more attention. He shouldered his supplies and headed for the door. "Jake Morrison," an old-timer muttered from his chair by the stove. "Used to be somebody once." The name hit like a physical blow, but Jeremiah kept walking. Outside, the afternoon sun cast long shadows across the dusty street. He pulled his hat low and started the long trek home. The mountain trail climbed steadily through stands of aspen and pine. His legs found their rhythm after the awkwardness of town interaction. Up here, among the rocks and trees, he could breathe again. No staring eyes, no whispered judgments about his past failures. The sound reached him just as the first clouds gathered overhead, sharp, rhythmic hammering echoing off the canyon walls. Jeremiah paused, his head tilted toward the noise. Someone was working frantically somewhere in the forest below. He could ignore it. Should ignore it. His cave waited another hour's climb above, stocked now for winter's siege. But something in the desperate rhythm of that hammering pulled at him. Jeremiah left the main trail, following a deer path that wound through thick timber. The hammering grew louder, more urgent. Through a gap in the trees, he spotted a small clearing with a half-collapsed cabin. A woman worked alone on the sagging roof, her dark skin glistening with sweat despite the cooling air. Her dress was simple but well-mended, and her movement spoke of determination that refused to yield. She drove nails with fierce precision, racing against time and the storm clouds building overhead. Jeremiah watched from the tree line as she stretched to reach a loose board. The ladder beneath her feet wobbled dangerously. Her tools were few and inadequate for the job at hand. Blood stained her palms where splinters had found their mark. This was Mercy Washington, though he didn't know her name yet. Her husband Samuel had died 3 months earlier in a mining accident, leaving her to finish their homestead dream alone. She'd sold everything she owned to keep the land, but winter was coming fast. The wind picked up, sending leaves swirling across the clearing. Mercy paused in her work,
wiping sweat from her forehead as she studied the darkening sky. She had maybe 2 hours of daylight left, and the roof still gaped like an open wound. Jeremiah shifted his weight, a branch cracking under his boot. Mercy spun toward the sound, hammer raised defensively. For a moment their eyes met across the clearing. Hers held no fear, only the fierce protectiveness of someone guarding something precious. He could walk away now, return to his solitude, and let someone else worry about the storms that were coming. That's what the old Jake Morrison would have done. That's what 15 years of guilt and isolation had taught him. But something in her determined stance reminded him of another woman, another time when he'd had the power to help and had failed completely. His wife Martha's face flickered through his memory, along with the tiny son he'd never been able to protect. Thunder rumbled in the distance. Mercy turned back to her work, driving nails with renewed urgency. The ladder swayed again, and this time she had to grab the roof's edge to keep from falling. Jeremiah stepped into the clearing. Mercy froze as the mountain man emerged from the shadows. His presence filled the space like a force of nature, all beard and buckskin and careful, measuring eyes. She'd heard stories about hermits in these mountains, but seeing one felt like encountering a legend made flesh. "Storm's coming," he said simply. She nodded, not trusting her voice. This man could help her or hurt her, and she had no way of knowing which. Jeremiah looked up at the damaged roof, then at her bloodied hands, then at the inadequate tools scattered in the dirt. His carpenter's eye saw everything wrong with the situation and everything that needed fixing. "You can't do this alone," he said. The words hung between them as the first drops of rain began to fall. Rain began in earnest as Jeremiah dropped his supply satchel and studied the damaged roof. Mercy watched him with cautious hope, hammer still gripped in her bleeding hands. "Need proper lumber," he said, examining the rotted boards. "And better nails." Without waiting for permission, he walked to the back of the cabin where a small woodshed stood. Samuel's tools hung neatly on the walls, better quality than what Mercy had been using. Jeremiah selected a saw and measuring square with the practiced eye of someone who understood their purpose. Mercy followed him. "I can pay you something when the harvest money comes." Jeremiah shook his head. "Storm won't wait for money." He moved with surprising grace for such a large man, measuring and marking boards with swift precision. His hands remembered skills buried under years of mountain solitude. The saw sang through seasoned pine as rain drummed harder on the shed roof. "You know this work," Mercy observed. "Used to." He handed her a cutboard. "Before." They worked in focused silence as the storm intensified. Jeremiah's expertise became evident in every motion. He identified weak points in the cabin's frame and reinforced them with salvaged lumber. His weathered hands guided nails home with single strikes while Mercy held boards steady. The wind howled through the trees, sending sheets of rain across the clearing. Water began seeping through the remaining gaps in the roof. They were racing time itself. "Inside," Jeremiah commanded as lightning split the sky. They dragged the remaining materials into the cabin's main room. The space was small but well organized. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, flanked by handmade shelves holding books and personal belongings. Everything spoke of care and hope for a future together. Jeremiah worked from within now, patching the worst gaps while rain pounded overhead. Mercy lit oil lamps against the gathering darkness. The warm light revealed more of her husband's craftsmanship in the furniture and fixtures. "He built this himself," Mercy said, running her hand along a smooth tabletop. "Good work." Jeremiah examined a joint in the ceiling beam. Knew what he was doing. "Samuel learned carpentry during the war. Said it was better than carrying a rifle." Jeremiah's hands stilled for a moment. Smart man. The storm reached full fury outside. Wind shrieked through the mountain passes while rain hammered the partially repaired roof. But the worst leaks were sealed now, and the cabin held against the assault. Mercy prepared coffee on the wood stove while Jeremiah finished securing loose boards. The familiar sounds of domestic life felt strange after his years of isolation. The warmth, the light,
The presence of another human being awakened memories he'd tried to bury. "You're not from around here," Mercy said, pouring coffee into chipped ceramic cups. "Colorado-born." Jeremiah accepted the cup gratefully. "Long time ago. But not always in the mountains." He studied her face in the lamplight. Intelligence shone in her dark eyes, along with the kind of strength that came from surviving hardship. This wasn't a woman who asked idle questions. "No," he admitted. "Not always." Thunder crashed overhead, shaking the cabin's frame. Mercy moved to a wooden chest beside the fireplace and lifted out a small bundle wrapped in faded cloth. Her movements were reverent, careful. "Samuel used to tell stories about the war," she said softly, "about the people who helped him when he needed it most." She unwrapped the cloth, revealing a collection of personal items: a worn Bible, a daguerreotype of a younger version of herself, and a wooden cross carved with intricate detail. Jeremiah's coffee cup froze halfway to his lips. The cross was simple but distinctive, carved from mountain cedar with a pattern of interwoven vines along the arms. He knew that carving because his own hands had shaped it 15 years ago. "He got this from a mountain man who saved his wagon train," Mercy continued, unaware of Jeremiah's reaction. "Place called Eagle's Pass. Samuel said the man appeared out of nowhere when bandits attacked, fought them off, and disappeared again before anyone could thank him proper." The coffee cup trembled in Jeremiah's grip. Eagle's Pass. He remembered it clearly now. A desperate fight against overwhelming odds. Families huddled behind overturned wagons, while he and 2 other men held off a gang of road agents. The cross had fallen from his pack during the battle, and he'd left it behind in his haste to escape before questions could be asked. "Samuel kept it all these years," Mercy said, turning the cross in her hands. "Said it reminded him that good people existed in the world, even when everything seemed dark." Jeremiah set down his cup with shaking hands. The implications crashed over him like a mountain avalanche. His forgotten act of heroism had saved Samuel Washington's life. Without that intervention, Samuel never would have reached Colorado, never would have met Mercy, never would have started building this homestead that she now fought so desperately to preserve. "The mountain man never gave his name," Mercy continued. "Samuel always wondered what became of him." Lightning illuminated the cabin interior, and in that stark moment, Jeremiah saw his entire life differently. The guilt and isolation that had driven him into the wilderness suddenly seemed less absolute. His failure to save his own family remained, but here was proof that his actions had mattered to someone, that lives had been preserved because of choices he'd made. The storm raged outside, but inside the small cabin, a different kind of tempest stirred in Jeremiah's chest. For 15 years he'd believed himself worthless, a broken man whose only legacy was failure. Now Mercy Washington sat before him, alive and fighting for her future because of something he'd done and forgotten. The wooden cross gleamed in the lamplight, a bridge connecting past and present, linking the mountain hermit to the heroic lawman he'd once been. Samuel's dream lived on in Mercy's determined hands, and suddenly Jeremiah understood why the sound of her hammering had called to him so powerfully. He wasn't here by accident. This was bigger than chance or coincidence. This was redemption offering itself one more time. Dawn broke clear and cold over the mountain valley. The storm had passed, leaving the air crisp and the cabin secure. Jeremiah emerged from the woodshed where he'd spent the night, giving Mercy her privacy while staying close enough to help if needed. She stood in the doorway, morning light catching the determination in her face. The crisis had passed, but both understood something fundamental had changed between them. "Coffee's ready," she said simply. They shared breakfast in comfortable silence, the wooden cross still visible on the table between them. Jeremiah found himself stealing glances at it, marveling at the strange paths that had brought him back to this artifact of his forgotten heroism. The sound of approaching horses shattered the peaceful morning. Mercy stiffened as hoofbeats thundered into the clearing. 6 riders emerged from the tree line, led by a man in an expensive coat who surveyed the homestead with calculating eyes. Luther Blackwood dismounted with the casual arrogance of someone accustomed to getting his way. His men spread out in a loose semicircle, hands resting near their weapons. The message was clear without words being spoken. Behind Blackwood rode a lean man with a deputy's badge pinned to his vest. Jeremiah recognized Clayton Reeves immediately, though 15 years had hardened the younger man's features. Reeves caught sight of Jeremiah, and his eyes narrowed with recognition, but he said nothing. "Miss Washington," Blackwood said with false politeness, "I trust you weathered the storm well." Mercy stepped forward, chin raised defiantly. "My cabin weathered it just fine." "About that," Blackwood produced a folded document from his coat. "I'm afraid there's been a misunderstanding about the ownership of this property." He unfolded the paper with theatrical precision. The document bore official seals and elaborate penmanship, impressive to anyone who didn't know what to look for. But Jeremiah's trained eye immediately spotted the flaws. "This deed shows clear title to this section, belongs to the Blackwood Cattle Company," the man continued. "Has for 3 years now. I'm afraid your late husband was squatting on my land." Mercy's face went pale, but her voice remained steady. "Samuel filed proper claims at the territorial office. We have papers. Territorial records can be mistaken." Blackwood's smile held no warmth. "Federal grants take precedence. I'm sure you understand." Jeremiah stepped closer, studying the document over Mercy's shoulder. His years as a sheriff had taught him to spot forged papers, and this one reeked of deception. The seals were too perfect, the aging artificial. Most telling was the date stamp, which showed signs of recent alteration. "Interesting document," he said quietly. Blackwood's attention shifted to the mountain man. "And you are?" "Someone who knows a federal land grant when he sees one." Jeremiah pointed to a section of the text. "This reference code doesn't match territorial filing systems used 3 years ago." Clayton Reeves shifted uncomfortably in his saddle. He knew Jeremiah's background, knew the sharp legal mind hidden beneath the hermit's appearance. The situation was becoming more complicated than Blackwood had anticipated. "I don't believe we need a drifter's opinion on legal matters," Blackwood said dismissively. "Maybe not." Jeremiah's voice carried quiet authority. "But you might want that document reviewed by someone who understands federal land law." Mercy looked between them, sensing undercurrents she didn't fully understand. But she recognized that the mountain man was challenging powerful men on her behalf, risking himself for someone he barely knew. Blackwood's facade slipped slightly. "Miss Washington, you have 30 days to vacate this property. After that, my men will assist with your departure." "And if she refuses?" Jeremiah asked. Reeves spoke for the first time. "Then she'll face the consequences of trespassing on private land." The threat hung in the air like smoke. Mercy's hands clenched into fists, but she held her ground. "This is my home," she said firmly. "My husband died building it, and I won't be run off by false papers and threats." Blackwood remounted his horse, his patience exhausted. 30 days, Miss Washington. Use them wisely." The riders wheeled their horses and departed as suddenly as they'd arrived. Dust settled slowly in the clearing, leaving Jeremiah and Mercy alone with the weight of what had just occurred. "They'll be back," Mercy said quietly. "Count on it." Jeremiah studied the forged deed she still held. "But they made a mistake showing me this." "You really know about legal documents?" Jeremiah nodded slowly. "Used to enforce them. Long time ago." He examined the paper more carefully, pointing out the flaws that marked it as fraudulent. His knowledge was encyclopedic, drawing from years of territorial law enforcement in mining communities where land fraud was common. "We need a federal judge," he said finally, "someone with authority over territorial courts." "Judge Theodore Hamilton rides circuit through Denver," Mercy said. "But Denver's 4 days' ride, and I can't leave the homestead unprotected." "Then we go together." The words surprised them both. Jeremiah had spoken without thinking, driven by something deeper than logic. The sight of that wooden cross, the connection to Samuel's story, the recognition that this fight was bigger than one homestead. "You'd do that?" Mercy asked. Jeremiah looked around the clearing, seeing it with new eyes. This wasn't just land anymore. It was Samuel Washington's dream made manifest, the future he'd died trying to build. It was proof that heroic actions had consequences that rippled forward through time. Samuel saved that cross for 15 years, he said quietly. Time I honored what it represented. Mercy nodded, understanding passing between them without need for more words. They would fight this together, using law instead of violence, intelligence instead of intimidation. But first, they had preparations to make, and a long journey ahead. The battle for the homestead was just beginning. They departed at dawn, two unlikely companions bound by necessity and growing trust. Jeremiah led them along mountain trails that avoided main roads, his knowledge of the terrain keeping them hidden from Blackwood's men who might be watching. Mercy rode Samuel's horse, a steady mare named Belle that had carried her husband to the mines each day. The animal seemed to understand the gravity of their mission, picking her way carefully along the rocky paths without complaint. The first day's journey took them through high country, where aspen groves blazed gold against the dark pine. Jeremiah's tracking skills proved invaluable as he read signs invisible to untrained eyes. Broken twigs, disturbed stones, and bent grass told stories of who had passed this way and when. 3 riders came through yesterday, he said, studying hoof prints near a stream crossing. Moving fast toward town. Blackwood's men? Mercy asked. Likely. He remounted and adjusted their course slightly eastward. We'll stay off the main trail. As they rode, the partnership that had begun during the storm deepened into something more substantial. Jeremiah's mountain wisdom complemented Mercy's strategic thinking. She understood legal procedures from helping other freed slaves navigate territorial bureaucracy, while his law enforcement background provided insight into how the system actually worked. Tell me about this Judge Hamilton, Jeremiah said as they made camp the first evening. Mercy arranged kindling for their fire. Circuit judge, appointed by territorial governor. Samuel met him once when claim jumpers tried to steal the Morrison family's mine. Jeremiah's hand stilled while unsaddling his horse. Morrison mine? Small operation up near Silverton. Family got justice because Hamilton couldn't be bought. She struck flint to steel, coaxing flame from dry grass. Samuel said he was the only honest judge in 3 territories. That night, as stars wheeled overhead, Jeremiah shared pieces of his buried past. He spoke of mining towns where law meant whatever the richest man decided, of territorial officials who sold justice to the highest bidder, of good families destroyed by corrupt men with forged papers. I was sheriff in a place like that, he admitted, staring into the dying fire. Town called Cedar Falls. Mine owner named Morrison ran everything. Mercy looked up sharply. Same Morrison? Could be. The irony wasn't lost on him. Good man trying to run an honest operation while everyone else got rich cheating. What happened? Jeremiah's face darkened with old pain. Cave in. Owner tried to cut corners on safety. My wife Martha was visiting the company store when it happened. She and our son were trapped when half the mountain came down. The fire crackled between them, filling the silence with its ancient voice. I was supposed to inspect those tunnels, he continued quietly. Supposed to enforce safety regulations. But Morrison convinced me his operation was solid. Said he'd never risk his workers for profit. It wasn't your fault. Wasn't it? Jeremiah picked up a stick and poked at the coals. I had authority. I had responsibility. I failed to use either when it mattered. The second day brought them down from the mountains into rolling foothills dotted with cattle ranches and small farms. Here they encountered other travelers, and Jeremiah's discomfort with civilization became apparent. He pulled his hat low and avoided eye contact with strangers. Mercy's social skills proved essential. Her educated speech and dignified bearing opened doors that might otherwise remain closed to a mountain hermit. She negotiated supplies and information while Jeremiah waited with the horses. Blackwood's been busy, she reported after speaking with a ranch foreman. Bought 3 properties in the last month, all from families who couldn't prove clear title. Same pattern everywhere, Jeremiah muttered. Find legal weakness, forge better documents, intimidate anyone who objects. Foreman says there's talk in town. People starting to wonder how one man got so much good land so cheap. That evening, they reached the outskirts of Denver. The territorial capital sprawled along the South Platte River, a mixture of permanent buildings and canvas-roofed enterprises that spoke to Colorado's boom-and-bust character. Gas lamps flickered to life as dusk settled over the muddy streets. They found lodging at a modest boarding house where Mercy's respectability secured them separate rooms. The proprietor, a widow named Mrs. Chen who'd lost her husband to mine accidents, recognized kindred spirits in their weathered faces. Judge Hamilton's holding court at the territorial building, she informed them. Over supper. Been hearing cases all week. Backlog's terrible since Judge Morrison retired. Jeremiah nearly choked on his coffee. Morrison? Theodore Morrison, Judge Hamilton's predecessor. Good man, they say. Lost everything in some mine disaster years back, turned to law afterward. The web of connection grew tighter. Jeremiah excused himself and walked out into the cool Denver evening, his mind reeling. Theodore Morrison, the mine owner whose operation had killed Martha and their son, the man who'd convinced him those tunnels were safe. Mercy found him sitting on the boarding house porch, staring at the distant mountains. "What is it?" she asked. He told her about Morrison, about the accident, about the guilt that had driven him into 15 years of isolation. When he finished, they sat in silence while Denver's night sounds swirled around them. "Maybe it's not coincidence," Mercy said finally. "What do you mean?" "All these connections. Samuel's Cross, the Morrison mine. Now Judge Morrison retiring just when we need Hamilton." She touched his arm gently. "Maybe some things are meant to happen." The next morning, they approached the territorial courthouse, an imposing brick structure that represented the growing permanence of Colorado's legal system. Inside, Judge Hamilton was hearing cases with the methodical precision of a man who'd seen every form of human corruption and still believed in justice. They waited their turn, clutching the forged deed that would either save Mercy's homestead or damn it forever. Judge Theodore Hamilton examined the forged deed through wire-rimmed spectacles, his weathered fingers tracing the ornate seals with practiced expertise. The courthouse chamber was nearly empty, except for Jeremiah, Mercy, and a court clerk who scratched notes with mechanical precision. "Sophisticated work," Hamilton murmured, holding the document up to the light streaming through tall windows. "But not sophisticated enough." He set the paper down and fixed them with sharp blue eyes that had seen decades of territorial corruption. "This seal purports to be from the Federal Land Office in Washington, but the embossing pattern changed 2 years ago. This document claims to be 3 years old but bears the new seal design." Mercy leaned forward. "So it's definitely forged." "Without question." Hamilton opened a thick ledger and began comparing entries. "Moreover, I have the actual federal grant records for that section. The land was designated for homestead claims in 1868, exactly when your husband filed." Jeremiah felt a familiar stirring of his old law enforcement instincts. "Your Honor, this isn't just about one homestead. Someone with resources is running a systematic operation." Hamilton nodded grimly. "I've suspected as much. 3 similar cases have crossed my bench in recent months, all involving a Luther Blackwood and his cattle company." The judge rose and moved to a filing cabinet, retrieving a folder thick with documents. He spread papers across his desk, revealing a pattern that made Jeremiah's blood run cold. 17 families displaced in the past year, Hamilton continued. All lost their land to supposedly superior federal claims. All the documents bear similar forgery markers. Mercy studied the paperwork with growing horror. 17 families? The Hendersons near Silverton, the Walsh clan outside Durango, the Morrison holdings at Cedar Falls. Hamilton's finger traced names on a list. Every case involved forged federal grants that superseded legitimate homestead claims. Jeremiah's face went pale at the mention of Cedar Falls. The Morrison holdings. Theodore Morrison's former mine property had been stolen through the same fraud scheme that now threatened Mercy's homestead. "Judge Morrison lost his land too?" Jeremiah asked quietly. "My predecessor lost everything when he couldn't prove his federal claim was legitimate." The forged documents presented against him were remarkably similar to this one. Hamilton tapped the deed they'd brought. Theodore retired to a small cabin outside town, broken by the injustice of it all. The full scope of the criminal enterprise became clear. This wasn't random land grabbing, but a carefully orchestrated scheme targeting specific properties across multiple territories. Someone with access to official records and legal expertise was systematically defrauding honest settlers. "There's more," Hamilton continued, his voice heavy with implications. "I've been corresponding with judges in Wyoming and New Mexico territories. They report identical patterns, same forged seal types, same legal language, same mysterious cattle company showing superior claims." He opened a map of the territorial boundaries, marked with red pins showing locations of suspected fraud cases. The pattern revealed a coordinated effort spanning thousands of square miles. "This isn't the work of one corrupt land baron," Hamilton said. "This is a criminal organization with resources, connections, and a systematic approach to stealing homestead land." Jeremiah studied the map with growing understanding. "They're targeting specific properties. Good land near water sources and transportation routes." "Exactly. Land that will be valuable when the railroad expansion reaches Colorado." Hamilton folded his hands. "Someone is positioning themselves to control key territory when development accelerates." Mercy felt the weight of realization settling over her. "We're not just fighting for my homestead. We're fighting for all these families." "Which brings us to the question of what we can do about it," Hamilton said. "I have jurisdiction over territorial matters, but this crosses federal boundaries. We need federal authority to address the full scope." He moved to his desk and began drafting official documents with quick, precise strokes. "Mr. Mackenzie, I'm deputizing you as a federal territorial marshal. Your law enforcement background makes you qualified, and frankly, we need someone who understands both the legal and practical aspects of this situation." Jeremiah's hand trembled as he accepted the badge and warrant papers. After 15 years of exile from civilized society, he was being handed legal authority again. The irony struck him like a physical blow. "Mrs. Washington, I'm issuing federal warrants for Luther Blackwood and his associates on charges of fraud, forgery, and conspiracy to deprive citizens of lawful property." Hamilton continued writing. "These documents give Marshal Mackenzie authority to make arrests and seize evidence." The transformation was remarkable. The mountain hermit and the struggling widow had become federal law enforcement and a protected witness in a major criminal investigation. "Time is critical," Hamilton warned. "If Blackwood realizes we've uncovered his broader operation, he'll destroy evidence and disappear. You need to return immediately and act before he can cover his tracks." Hamilton handed Jeremiah additional papers. "These are federal injunctions protecting all 17 properties pending investigation. No one can be removed from their land until this matter is resolved in federal court." "What about the other families?" Mercy asked. "How do we find them?" "Most are listed here." Hamilton provided a detailed roster. "Some have already been displaced, but they have legal standing to reclaim their property once we prove the fraud." As they prepared to leave Denver, the magnitude of their mission became fully apparent. They weren't just saving one homestead anymore. They were the key to exposing a criminal enterprise that had destroyed dozens of families across 3 territories. The journey home would be more dangerous now. Blackwood couldn't afford to let them reach Pine Ridge with federal authority and evidence of his crimes. But they also weren't alone anymore. Behind them stood the full weight of territorial law and a federal judge determined to see justice done. The real battle was about to begin. The ride back to Pine Ridge carried new urgency. Jeremiah wore his federal marshal's badge beneath his coat, the weight of legal authority both familiar and strange after 15 years of exile. They pushed their horses hard through mountain passes, racing against time and Blackwood's suspicions. Smoke rose from Mercy's clearing as they crested the final ridge. Too much smoke. They spurred their mounts down the trail, fear driving them faster than caution should have allowed. 6 men waited in the homestead clearing. Blackwood stood beside a wagon loaded with Mercy's possessions while his hired guns formed a loose perimeter. Deputy Clayton Reeves supervised 2 men boarding up the cabin windows with rough planks. "You're early," Blackwood called as they approached.
I gave you 30 days. Jeremiah dismounted slowly, his hand resting near the pistol at his hip. The federal warrant papers crinkled in his coat pocket, but timing would determine everything now. Federal injunction, he announced, producing the official documents. This property is protected pending investigation of fraudulent land claims. Blackwood's confident smile faltered. You have no authority here. I do now. Jeremiah opened his coat, revealing the marshal's badge. Federal Territorial Marshal, duly appointed by Judge Hamilton. Clayton Reeves stepped forward, his own badge catching sunlight. I don't recognize federal authority in territorial matters. Then you don't understand the law. Jeremiah's voice carried the cold authority of his former profession. Federal grants supersede territorial jurisdiction. You know that, Clayton. The use of his first name made Reeves stiffen. Their shared history hung between them like a loaded weapon, 15 years of accumulated guilt and betrayal crystallizing into this moment. Mercy climbed down from her horse, chin raised defiantly. This is my lawful property. You're trespassing. Not according to this deed. Blackwood produced the forged document again, but his confidence had evaporated. According to Judge Hamilton's investigation, that document is fraudulent. Jeremiah stepped closer. Along with 16 others used to steal homestead property across 3 territories. The revelation hit like a thunderclap. Blackwood's men exchanged nervous glances while their employer's face went pale. The local land grab had just become a federal crime with serious consequences. You're under arrest, Leonard Briggs, Jeremiah continued, using Blackwood's real name. Federal charges of fraud, forgery, and conspiracy. Blackwood's hand moved toward his gun, but stopped when he realized 4 of his 6 men had already stepped back. Only Reeves and 1 other gunman remained loyal, and their odds had just turned poor. How long have you known? Blackwood asked quietly. Judge Hamilton's been tracking your operation for months. The Morrison Mine, the Henderson Ranch, the Walsh Homestead. Same forged seals, same fraudulent claims. You can't prove anything. Jeremiah pulled out a thick folder of documents. Federal warrants for your arrest, injunctions protecting all 17 properties, and testimony from families you've defrauded. The weight of evidence crushed Blackwood's remaining defiance. His criminal enterprise, so carefully constructed over months of patient fraud, was collapsing around him. Clayton Reeves found himself at a crossroads. He could draw his gun and fight for a lost cause, or he could salvage what remained of his future. Clayton, Jeremiah said quietly, you know how this ends. Don't make it worse. Like you made it worse at Cedar Falls? Reeves' voice cracked with old resentment. You left us all behind when that mine collapsed, disappeared into the mountains while the rest of us faced the consequences. I failed there. I know that. Jeremiah's admission carried 15 years of accumulated guilt. But you don't have to fail here. You can still choose the right side. The tension stretched taut as wire. 6 men faced 2, but the moral authority had shifted completely. Blackwood's remaining gunmen looked ready to bolt. The hired muscle understood the difference between intimidating homesteaders and facing federal charges. Federal court means prison, Jeremiah continued. Real prison, not territorial jail. But cooperation means reduced charges, maybe even immunity. Reeves struggled with the decision that would define the rest of his life. Behind him lay years of corruption and easy money. Ahead waited either redemption or destruction. He's right, one of Blackwood's men said suddenly. I ain't facing federal charges for your land schemes. The hired gun dropped his weapon and stepped away. His action broke the remaining solidarity. The other gunman followed suit, leaving Blackwood and Reeves isolated. It's over, Leonard, Jeremiah said. Surrender peacefully, and the courts will consider cooperation. Blackwood looked around at his abandoned allies, then at the federal warrants that sealed his fate. Slowly, he raised his hands. Clayton? Jeremiah extended his hand toward his former deputy. After a long moment, Reeves unbuckled his gun belt and let it fall. I've got information about the forged documents, names, locations, how the operation worked. That's a start. 3 days later, Federal marshals from Denver arrived to transport prisoners and secure evidence. Blackwood's elaborate fraud scheme unraveled completely under investigation. Forged documents, stolen land records, and bribed officials formed a criminal network spanning multiple territories. Judge Hamilton's circuit court worked overtime processing cases and restoring stolen property. 17 families reclaimed their homesteads, their federal land grants confirmed as legitimate. The Morrison mine property went back to Theodore Morrison, giving the retired judge some measure of justice. 6 months passed like seasons changing in the high country. Jeremiah accepted the permanent position of Pine Ridge Sheriff, his federal marshal authority allowing him to serve both local and territorial law. The town that had once whispered about his failures now depended on his experience and integrity. Mercy's homestead flourished under her determined care. Samuel's dream cabin became the foundation for a prosperous farm that supplied produce to the growing community. She established a school for local children, her education and leadership filling a crucial need. Their friendship deepened into something rare and precious, not romance, but partnership built on mutual respect and shared purpose. Two broken people who had found healing through helping others reclaim their stolen hopes. The wooden cross still sat on Mercy's mantelpiece, now flanked by photographs of the families they'd helped save. Samuel's legacy lived on in every recovered homestead, every restored dream, every act of courage that chose justice over easy profit. In the end, the mountain man who had lost everything found something better than what he'd had before. Not the family that was taken from him, but a community that needed his strength and a friend who understood his journey. Some stories end with grand gestures and dramatic declarations. This one ended with quiet satisfaction and the knowledge that broken things could be repaired, that lost people could find their way home, and that second chances were always possible for those brave enough to take them.